Welcome to this Thursday, May 16th session on Insight Maker relationship models. For those of you who have not used Insight Maker before, it's a free web-based environment for creating relationship and simulation models. And when I said free, it's completely free. There's absolutely nothing that you can pay for. So if you don't currently have an account, just go to insightmaker.com. There's no www, and create a free account. When you go ahead and fill out the information and submit it, it should send you an email verification notice. And then once you do that, then you can go ahead and log in. When you log in to Insight Maker, you'll end up on your launch page, which will show all of the models that you have created in reverse chronological order so that the newest ones are at the beginning, and you can search through them. There's always, wherever you are, there's a button so that you can create a new insight. When you look at your screen, you won't see this top bar across here. That bar is there because Scott has got me moderating some of the stuff that goes on in the environment. So you'll just see this row here. So what you want to do is you want to create a new insight. Oh, so other things you can look at is you can look at the new insights. Insight Maker posts updates as to insights that were created and edited by other people. This one was worked on by somebody 3 minutes ago, and this one was 4 minutes ago. And currently, Insight Maker has about 165,000 registered users, and there are somewhere above 165,000 models in the database. Don't be concerned about the number of users slowing the system down, because one absolutely brilliant Scott Fort-Monroe, who wrote Insight Maker all by himself over a period of about 5 years. I'm just the testing elf. He wrote it in JavaScript so that it runs completely in your browser. The only time that it interacts with the server is to save things and go get things for you. Other than that, all of the mechanics and everything happens locally in your browser. So we create a new insight. This is the workspace. It gives you this overview, introduction to how to build a simulation model. And this little model right here is actually a working simulation model. Today we're going to talk about qualitative relationship models as opposed to simulation models. There's a session next week on how to do simulation models in Insight Maker. So when you get here, the first thing you want to do is click and clear this so it gives you an empty workspace. There is no place else to go. Everything that you do is done in this window. For creating relationship models, you can use any of the primitives that you want to. Scott created this as a simulation environment, though the connection rules were relaxed so that you can create links between almost anything, well, between anything, and go ahead and use it to do qualitative models. Typically, what people find most useful is to use variables. So you can come over here and click on variable. On the right-hand side, there is a parameters tab, which will show the parameters for whatever primitive you have selected. You don't have to worry about any of these except the first couple until we get into simulations next week. So that you create this, and then you can come over here and you can call this, and I'm going to do savings account as always. Alternatively, from selecting over there, you can right-click and use the drop-down. And what's nice about the drop-down is it selects the title inside of it. So you can simply type in as soon as you create it, and all of the things are resizable and movable. And if you don't want one, you can select it and hit the delete key, and the Control Z or undo works with Control Z, so you can get them back. And you can continue to do Control Z back through the sequence as far as you want to or need to. So you create an element, and then I want to talk about deposits. You can go ahead and create another variable called deposit, or you can simply select this one and do a Control D and duplicate it, and then double click on it and call it deposits. And then select links and create a link from one to the other. Insight Maker, it took, I don't know, 6 or 7 years before the underlying package that was built with enabled the ability to do curved links. But if you select a link, hold down the Shift key and click on it, it will put waypoints on it so that you can go ahead and curve the lines any way that you want to. It seems that people that do relationship models have this passion for curved lines because we do a lot of loops, I guess. Any primitive that you create, there is a bunch of style features that you can use. You can change the text, the color of the font, the line color, the fill color, whether the text is bold or italic or all the rest of this. Typically for relationship models, Insight Maker does not have the ability to affix S's or O's or pluses or minus to the links the way that some applications do, because it wasn't designed to do these kinds of relationship models. So I use the blue and red as I typically have for everything else. So I make the line a solid line, and I make the width. Where's the width? Line width. I don't know. Line width about 5. So I now have this. If you move, if I put another variable out here, if you click on this, you can reposition a connection from one to another, but it will delete the waypoints when you do that. So let me put them back. I'll put one of them back anyway. Then savings account is also influenced by interest. And the interest adds to the savings account, but I've said before that I'm extremely lazy. So I don't want to have to create a link from here to here and then go color it the way I want it to. So I just select this and I'll do a Control D and I'll duplicate it. And then I'll put this here and this here. So I already have the colors and the style that I want. Works for me, probably works for you too. So the interest is created by the amount of money in the savings account. Oh, sorry, didn't want to do that. Actually wanted to do this. Duplicate this. Connect this to here. And to here, hold down the Shift key and do a click. And also select this and duplicate it and bring it up here and call it interest rate. And duplicate this and bring it over here so that this connects. So that's the same model that I created in Kumu the other day. It's a basic reinforcing structure and to put a label on it, I'll go ahead and use a picture. And then the picture, I will go ahead and find a built-in image and call it this. Okay. So you can put an image on any primitive in Insight Maker. If you want to dress it up and improve the way that it looks, the difficulty is that the references are by URL as opposed to being able to import and excuse me, and have Insight Maker manage the image itself. So if I go to Google and look for interest rate, and then look for images, and this looks like a good one. Let me go ahead and, can I copy image address, and then come back here and do a right click, and for the custom image, simply plug that in. And then because it overwrites the image, I mean, the image overwrites the text, I can come over here and say I want to align it and move it to the bottom so it puts the text underneath it. And you can resize this as you want or need to, okay? So you can put an image on anything. The difficulty is you're referring to an image that's referenced on the web someplace, and things on the web have a tendency to change. So I use a utility called Cloudinary, which I'll cover sometime, maybe later today, maybe some other day. And I store all my images in Cloudinary. I've been using it now for 4 years for free without exceeding the limits for a free account. So, and that way I don't have to worry about things changing. Questions so far? I have.
Yeah, Gene. Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was just wondering, could you have, where you have interest, could you have increase in interest and then the other one, interest rate, a decrease, and then have a double loop? Because it's like, okay, what happens if it goes up? What happens if it goes down?
Well, okay. So the implications of my blue arrows are that if the interest rate increases, the interest increases, as opposed to what I do with my red dashed arrows is the opposite relationship. It changes in the opposite direction or subtracts from. So that as by using the convention for blue and red, as I increase deposits, it increases the savings account. As I increase the savings account and everything else is held constant, it increases the interest. And when interest is calculated, it adds to the savings account. So there's the difficulty is that the definitions are overloaded depending upon what the type of entity is. There are two kinds of things. There are those which accumulate or decline, and those which don't, which are constant or are calculated. There's a difference between the river that flows into the lake and the lake. The lake is a quantity of water that's there, and if the river stops floating, the lake is still there. Of course, if the river flows out of the lake, it continues to decrease the level, and if it stops flowing, then the level stays the same. If I decrease the amount of money in the savings account, the interest decreases. But if I decrease the interest, it still adds to the savings account. It just doesn't add so much. And that's why it's good to, you can actually put labels on these things, but you got to find the little yellow dot so you can move it. And then you probably want to make the text bold so you can see it. So I've now added a label that says adds to. So I can describe these things that make it easier for other people to understand. And as I'll show, Insight Maker has a very nice storytelling feature like Kumu that allows you to unfold a model for other people so that they don't have to try and digest it all at once. And for every entity in Insight Maker, you can click on it and come over here and you can write a note. This is a description. So that when somebody mouses over it, this little eye shows up, and if you click on it, it's a tooltip. You can also use Control Period to open that tooltip in a sizable window so that, and it's formatable so that you can write a long description with formatting for what that particular item is. You can also put them on connections. So that when you mouse over it, the little eye shows up, right? I mean, it's good to document. In other words, when you develop a relationship model, you think about things and you come to conclusions about what it is that you're building, but all of your thoughts are not in the model, so that the person that you share it with is not there at the same time that you create it. I mean, the world goes on, but your world is going on different than everyone else's because you're thinking about all these relationships. So it's good to give other people at least a fighting chance of understanding what it was that you were thinking when you were putting the model together. And that's why we put notes in it. In terms of loops, Insight Maker has a very nice feature over here under Tools, which says Identify Loops. And it says it knows that interest to savings account to interest is a loop. And because I use red and blue, you can, if you count the number of red connections in a loop, and it's 0 or even, it's a reinforcing loop, meaning activity creates a result which creates more of the same activity. It's an exponential growth structure. And if it's odd, it's a balancing loop. And using this tool, Identify Loops, it makes it very easy to go ahead and just walk through and count the number of red ones, and you know what kind of loop it is.
Thank you, Gene.
You can also hold down the Shift key and select a group of things and move them around together. I don't think, yeah, there isn't a grouping feature. Well, there is a grouping feature, okay? If you select all this stuff and come up here and say, make folder, okay? You've now essentially created a group because they're all in this folder, and you can close the folder and call it savings account. And you can open it and everything is in there. You can pull things back out of the folder so that when you close it, that's still outside. You can delete folders too, but you have to make sure that you get everything out of the folder before you delete it. Otherwise, you delete the stuff that was in it. So what you have to do is you have to select all this stuff. You have to drag it outside of the folder and and you know that there's nothing left in the folder when you can't close it. Excuse me. Notice the little clicky thing up here to go ahead and open and close the folder is gone. So now when I delete the folder, I haven't lost any of my stuff.
Gene, quick question about the folder.
Yes.
It's tantalizing me as something that's almost hierarchical design. Is there something, are there attributes, graphical attributes you can put on the folder to make it into a hierarchical design element?
Well, there is no limit to the extent to which you can create folders and put folders and folders and folders and folders. You can also, if you create a folder, add folder, make folder. Folder is just like any other thing. Where's it? Oh, I can't do this. I got to close it first. So I can put a picture on the folder itself to indicate what's inside of it. Let me move the label so that it's below. Okay. So now I have this picture of interest on dollars, and it's a folder so that I can go ahead and open it.
Does Kumu have folders?
No. Kumu allows you to do multiple maps in a project, right, but it doesn't have the equivalent of this, which I've been arguing with them for a long time that I would really like to be able to. In other words, in Kumu, you can put a link on an element so that if you double click it, it will take you to the other map, but it doesn't allow you to actually do the abstraction in the same context. Okay. So that if you build a large model that's got dozens and dozens of relationships in it, you can make it much easier for other people to understand if you abstract segments of it and put them in folders and put labels on them so that you can talk about the relationships between the folders. And then if somebody wants to know about, okay, this, because you can go ahead and create another variable out here and do a connection from here to here. And that's outside of in other words, there's something in the folder that connects to this. And you can also go ahead and connect to the folder itself, so that now it doesn't tell you where in the folder this connects to, it just connects to the folder. Other questions? Is there a way to formulate so results look fuzzy? John, I'm not sure what you mean about so the things look fuzzy. Can you help me? I think your mic is muted.
A model like this is going to look very much principal times interest squared, whatever. But what if you have something that's more qualitative and you're talking about human relationships or something where it could be a lot of, well, maybe, kind of.
Well, then I would go ahead and I would create this link and I would label it to be something like somewhat.
Oh, okay.
In other words, I got one thing on top of another. So it's not a definite relationship. All right. In other words, somewhat, or whatever else you want to use to imply that it's not a hard and fast, you could call it possibly, or, I mean, I understand when you get into modeling things with active elements in the model that are capable of changing their mind on a moment's notice, it's difficult to say definitively that this is the influence. Okay?
Okay. Very good.
Any other questions? Well, let me go ahead and close this, and I'll now go ahead and create the other thing I create all the time, which is a bathtub. But I'm going to go ahead and use the primitive, which is a stock, which is the system's dynamic entity typically used for things that accumulate or decline over time, such as a body of water or coffee in a cup or the CO2 in the atmosphere. To differentiate it from a variable, just so it's easier for people to realize that what I have here is a stock that cannot change instantaneously. It grows over time. A variable changes instantaneously based on the values that are used to compute it, whereas the amount of level in the lake, yeah, probably changes instantaneously by minute amounts, but for it to, in other words, when I'm filling the bathtub, I typically don't measure the flow in molecules of water. I do it in some flow rate in terms of gallons per hour or something like that. And then I'm concerned about the tub level because I want to take a bath. So the objective is a full tub. And the difference between those is a gap, which I can make quite small. And this, all we do in qualitative models, we just use links. Flows and transitions are for simulation models. So I'll go ahead and create this. And now I got to go back here and style this the way that I did the other ones, because this is an and tell it that the line is a solid line. You see, this is why I don't want to do these individually, because it's a pain. Solid line, and the width is 5. All right, so now I've got this. And then here's the difference. If I increase the desired full tub level, the gap gets bigger. If I increase the water level in the tub, the gap gets smaller. So I need to distinguish the difference, and I always use red and do the line width, same size, 5. So you can develop and use whatever set of conventions are convenient or comfortable for you, though if whatever you end up doing, it would be good if you included a legend in the model to give other people a chance to be able to intuit some amount of information from looking at the picture. Mark has a question. Once you make the changes to the line styles, can you make them the default settings, or for that matter, any other style setting? Okay. There is use as default style. So you can, so if I go ahead and select this and make it the default style, then the next time I create it'll be the same style. So I could go ahead. Thanks, Mark. I had sort of completely forgot about that. I usually draw more blue ones than red ones. So if I create a blue one, make it the default, then I only have to duplicate or create or modify them to be red. There's also a feature that allows you to go ahead and develop a style sheet that, or multiple style sheets, such that you can define the fill color, the line color, the line style, all of the different aspects for every primitive that there is, and save it, and then you can reload that to start if you do that. I just that's something that I pursued, and I can't even give you a good reason why. So now the gap causes some action. To open the faucet, and the bigger the gap, the more that I'm likely to open the faucet. So we'll make this one the same direction, and the faucet open adds water to the tub. Now, the more I open the faucet, the faster it adds water to the tub. And as I close off on the faucet, it still adds water to the tub. Though it's, it still adds water, even though I change it. Whereas if the gap gets bigger, I open the faucet more. If the gap gets smaller, I probably open the faucet less. So it changes in the same direction. So there's the same direction, or adds to, or the opposite direction, or subtracts from. So this is now, I can use the create picture and go get a default built-in image and call this a balancing loop. This is the typical indicator for a balancing loop, and I can label these. Tub. Okay. And then I can go ahead and put this in a different folder and tell it that it's make a folder. Uh-oh, not what I wanted. Wonder why I'm actually getting, oh, I'm not getting it. It's just for some reason making the, oh, I think there's another object here that I'm not.
Try the bottom left.
There we go. So sometimes things happen and I can't even quite figure out why. So I'll go ahead and then I'll open this. Then I'll go up here and look for bathtub. And I'll, oh, this one looks good. Expensive too. I don't want to do that. Copy image address. Come back here and right click. Tell it that I want to add a custom image. Put in there. align, move the text to the bottom of the picture. Now I can come down here and move this back up. So in terms of creating relationship models, you've seen the balancing loop and the reinforcing loop, and that's all there is. Everything else is just some combination of balancing and reinforcing loops put together. You look at the self-fulfilling prophecy. It's two reinforcing loops that interact on an ongoing basis. And when I talk about archetypes in a few weeks, I'll talk about a number of these recurring structures that we find over and over and over again that are really nice because they give you a sense of how things are likely to unfold. I used to be continually driven to madness by the games that people play in high-tech organizations. And once I came to understand how archetypes work, the antics became a great source of interesting and fascination because you could see how they were likely to unfold and which ones to run away from. Questions? You can go ahead and put labels on the folder. In other words, the label that was there before is the label that's on the outside of the bathtub, on the outside label on the folder. You can also label the inside of the folder, which is different from the outside. And you can color the background. You can do all kinds of things with it that you wish. You can also put information on that's that image. This of filling. So that when you have this closed, you mouse over and there's an eye there too that tells you about what's in the folder without actually having to open it. What I should have told you about 30 minutes ago is as soon as you create a model, you should come up here and click Save. You give it a title. You can give it a set of tags which are searchable. You can give it some direction. You can then save the model as public or private. Insight Maker was built primarily to allow people to rapidly develop models and share them with other people just by giving them the URL. So I'm going to leave this as public and I'm going to save it. And now you know that this is model number 168,098. When you now go back to Insight Maker, back to your splash page that you land on once you log in, you'll see that this is the new model that you just created and last worked on 18 seconds ago. And you can come here and open, you can walk through and look at your models to see, okay, let me go back and look at this one. This is the one I want to work on, as opposed to having to search for the names. And just go ahead and open it back up. Let me close this. Oh, this is the same thing. Okay. If you create links, you can also change the direction of them if you want to. The arrows, that makes it easier. As I said, you can use any of these primitives to create the relationship models. They look different in terms of, you've seen the stock and the variable. Insight Maker, in addition to doing simulations, also does agent-based modeling, so that this is a cloud and this looks like this, only it's got rounded corners. this looks like a variable, but it's actually different. You can export them, you can zoom in and out. Your models are all, I said, they're saved immediately once you make changes to them. So it's constantly changing things. You can, when you create a model, it's essentially private. If it's a public model, anybody else can see it. Anybody that can see it can clone it to create a copy of it that then belongs to them, which they can do anything with that they would like. And the reason for that is to be able to leverage someone else's development as opposed to having to start over again. It has a marvelous storytelling feature, which I'll cover in a session next week. Any other tools here that are useful? To look at, let's see, I said the models that you create are private. You can go ahead and give someone else access. If you create a private model, you can allow other people to look at it. If it's a private or public model, you can give other people the ability to actually modify it. If you have a private model, it would be good if you give them view access and modify access. I mean, doesn't make much sense for you to allow them to edit something that they can't look at. But I've done things that dumb. So everything is here. You can start where here, you can make a new insight here. You can star models so that they're more pronounced. You can search for insights. You can delete it. That's what there is. If you look at some other things that I've done in the past, this is, let me get out here. This is essentially Argyris's ladder of inference, which somewhere along the line, I realized that it's not actually a ladder, it's actually a loop. So that based upon my beliefs, I take action, which produces real data and experience, from which I select which portion I pay attention to. I affix meaning, develop assumptions, connections, and it fosters the development or reinforcement of beliefs. At the same time, when I do that, I take my beliefs and I select which portion of the real data and experience I want to pay attention to. And oftentimes I look at things in a manner where what I see proves what I believe as opposed to what really is. So the tendency is to short circuit my actual learning and development because I'm not paying attention to the real data. I'm paying attention to the data that affirms what I want it to say. When we look in the mirror, we see what we want to see.
Gene, can these be downloaded?
Okay, there's an option. I'm echoing. There's an export feature where you can download the Insight Maker file onto your desktop, which you can reload into Insight Maker so that you could develop a model and never save it to the cloud at all. You can look at a complete list of all of the pieces that were put. This is typically more useful for simulation models because it will tell you what the equations are. And you can create an SVG diagram that you can paste somewhere else.
What is SVG?
It's something vector graphic. I forget what the S means, but it's the type of diagram where it doesn't change the resolution when you make it bigger or smaller. Oh, it's scaled vector graphics, I guess.
Now, once you download it, you're not going to be able to open the folders, are you?
No, it's a scaled vector. It's an image. It's like not a PDF. It's like a GIF file or a JPEG. It's just a picture,
Okay.
but it's a type of picture that is made out of real vectors as opposed to just dots. You can also, and once you export it, you can re-import it. What is also kind of neat is if you develop pieces so that this has a URL. If I go back here, there's an option to import an Insight Maker file. No, Insight Maker URL. So if I type in the URL for that other model, it gives me a folder, and that folder has that model in it. So that you can't do a copy and paste from one model to another because there was too much of a problem with the IDs of the images. So Scott figured out if he just created a folder and stuck all the stuff in there, the IDs wouldn't collide with each other. The other thing is you can take this and here's the code to embed this particular model in a web page or a blog or whatever else you want to embed it in. And if you embed the simulation models, they're functional wherever you embed them. So if you develop a simulation model and you want to embed it in a web page, a person goes to that web page, they can actually run the simulation in the web page. I was going someplace. Oh, so this is one that I have redone umpteen number of times, which is a insect control loop where crop-eating insects cause crop damage. So I apply pesticides to kill the crop-eating insects. And you notice that every one of the elements in this model has actually got a note on it. Well, at least all of the entities to explain what they are. And the connections actually have labels on them to help other people understand what the relationship is or does. And what I'll talk about in a session next week for Insight Maker storytelling is you can create stories so that you can unfold this model piece by piece and tell the story down at the bottom so somebody can read about the pieces as you show them to them. Okay. Question? I can't be that clear. There must be questions. Here's one of The Boy Who Cried Wolf, Aesop's Fables. I've often told people that I think Aesop's Fable is one of the best books ever written on systems. So the boy is bored tending sheep and he wants attention. So he cries wolf, causes the townspeople to come running, making him the center of attention, which relieves his boredom. And what he doesn't realize is that if he cries wolf and there's no wolf, it's a lie, which diminishes the belief-o-meter, which diminishes the likelihood that the townspeople come running. So this is a reduced belief reinforcing structure. And additionally, if he cries wolf, and there is a wolf, that's truth, which increases the belief-o-meter, which increases. So that there's The Boy Who Cried Wolf is a balancing structure, a reinforcing structure, and a balancing structure. But this should give you a sense of how the images make the relationship model easier to understand. Differences between Kumu and Insight Maker. In Kumu, it's very difficult to resize and style every individual entity in the model. Kumu explicitly knows about loops, so that if you click and hold on a loop label, it will just show you the elements of that loop as opposed to the whole thing. Insight Maker doesn't, well, Insight Maker knows about loops to the extent that you can go over here and say, identify loops. And as I said, you can count the number of red ones so that this loop right here is a balancing loop. There's an even number. What is that? Service income. It looks like there's two things there that are not identified, which is weird. But this is a reinforcing loop, and this is a balancing loop because obviously I've got something in there that doesn't have a label on it, or is it? I'll have to look into that. Some more trial and learning. But it identifies that there are, in fact, three loops, and you can easily identify whether they're balancing or reinforcing loops simply by counting the number of red ones.
Quick question, Gene. Is it possible to have multiple users change models sort of real time so that you could imagine collaborations on the models, or is that problematic? Multiple
people can create changes at the same time, you just can't see them. So that you would have to go ahead and reload the model. Now, if three people had access to this and were developing pieces, you'd have to come up here and tell the browser to reload the model, and then you'd get the changes. Scott did have it set up so that it was at one time, so it was real time, but the overhead was unreal. So He took it out because it just, I find that rather than have multiple people working on a model at the same time, or if I have multiple people working on a model at the same time, you just can't keep up.
Yeah. Could you do, I like the idea of you linking in that submodel. Could you have people working on submodels that are then somehow related and linked together through that? Yeah.
Yeah. Somebody could be working on a different model with a different number on it.
Right.
And then you could go ahead and tell it to insert and put in the URL for that model, and it would bring that folder in with that, whatever it was that they were working on. Though you would have to bring it in every time they made a change to it because it's not a real-time connection.
Got it. Yeah.
I find what works best is if you have someone facilitating and someone doing the mechanics. I find that I can't do the mechanics and facilitate the interactions at the same time because I can't talk to people and think about other things while I'm trying to connect the things we already thought about.
Right.
It takes two. And simply share the screen with people and have people talk about the aspects that they think that the model should develop. I just added 2 sessions this morning on group model development next week.
That's great.
That I want to go through and talk about those. Well, I want to go through and sort of experimentally investigate some alternatives about how to go about doing that. I mean, I have done lots of model development with people in a room. Doing it with people all remotely located over the web is sort of an experiment in terror. And I'd like to go ahead and investigate it with a few people. So they're there that you can now go ahead and register for them.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Okay. Other questions? The storytelling features of Insight Maker, because it's a simulation environment, are richer than for Kumu because it just allows you to show pieces. The storytelling feature in Insight Maker you can actually create pieces and delete pieces and change connections to pieces. And because Scott developed a whole underlying API so that you can use the entire JavaScript language in the midst of storytelling, which makes it doesn't have to be complex to use, though the complexity is there if you want to investigate it and use it. He did a very good job of enabling it, but not beating people over the head with it. Okay? The other feat, in other words, the other thing is, you saw this as I walked through and did this storytelling mode. He also developed this thing called publish article. Oh, you can't use this in the storytelling mode, which says you can tell it to go ahead and turn the story that you developed into an HTML page that you simply read as an HTML page. So that's the story that was unfolded, so that someone only has to go ahead and page down if that's useful. I go ahead and use the stories to do video voiceovers so that it's not there. So, I mean, and that way, someone doesn't have to read all the text. They just watch the model unfold as I describe what they're looking at. And I do that both with the Insight Maker models and the Kumu models. And I'll talk about that in the storytelling sessions next week. One for Kumu and two for Insight Maker, because next week, what am I doing? I can't remember. Events. So next week I'm doing Insight Maker simulation, then I'm doing Kumu storytelling, and then I'm doing Insight Maker in two parts, because one part is just to talk about the qualitative aspects of or unfolding a qualitative model, and then I have to talk about how you use the scripting to actually do simulation models. Credit. This might be it. This might not be it. Oh yeah, this is it. So this is a simulation model which unfolds a story, so that it's actually changing. The story is actually changing parameters in the background, so that when it runs the simulations, as opposed to having to remember that I set this to this and this to this and then run it, it's all scripted in the background, so that it scripts it. Storytelling. You can't do storytelling in the storytelling. So this is the sequence of stuff that tells that story, and it has run action sequences that actually set values and tell it to execute stuff. So Scott Fort Monroe is probably one of the most brilliant people I know. It took him about 5 years to write this. Other questions? At the end of the session, I will go ahead and send out a link to the video and a link to this entry point right here. And all of the things that I have showed you are here so that you can look at them. And for all of the future events, you can also register for them here.
This is a somewhat superficial question, but the symbols, let's say you're doing a modeling a language system that has different symbols. Is it easier just to make images that you just plug into those, or can you actually change the vector graphic of, let's say, a variable or a stock element so that you could even expand the subsets of what types those might be? Or is it easier just to do it graphically with images?
There is no, in other words, for every element in the model that you create, for every one of the primitives, there is a parameter panel, and there's no ability to actually change the characteristics of that particular entity other than doing style changes.
Got it.
Okay.
So there's no way to create your own primitive library?
No. Okay. I say yes, and I say no, and then I say yes, because you could create a set. In other words, suppose you use a tragedy of the common structure over and over and over again. You build a model called Tragedy of the Commons, and every time you want to use it, you import it. So it's your own subset of models that you can reuse. You probably, when you use it someplace else, you might want to change the labels on it, though the structure doesn't change. I mean, a Tragedy of the Commons is Tragedy of the Commons, the same way as Success to the Successful and Escalation and all the rest of these. So you could build yourself a library of reusable components. Okay. For those of you who I haven't mentioned already, rather than have this be an event, I have started a Slack group with a channel for every one of the sessions that I'm doing, so that if you would like to participate in the Slack group, so that we can go ahead and continue discussions about this particular webcast or any of the other ones, then let me know and I will send you an invitation to the Slack group. It just got started a couple of days ago, so that there aren't many people, but 38 people showed up already. Well, I'm glad it looks promising, John. Thank you, Mark. Oh, Mark said he's looking forward to, maybe I shouldn't comment about what people say privately, but that's all right. Mark said he's looking forward to future sessions, and so am I. I have this tendency, I tell people that I'm retired, but I only work 80 hours a week. And I do that for a period until I burn myself out and go into semi-depression for some period of time, and I'm in doldrums. And a few weeks ago, I came out of it. And when I came out of it, all this stuff happened. So it's not a butterfly coming out of the chrysalis. It's more like a moth coming out of a cocoon. Could you pronounce your first name for me? Because I looked at it and I'm pretty sure I keep getting it wrong. See, I got it so wrong that. Sorry. Okay. Well, I'll answer more questions if you have some. Otherwise, I guess we'll wrap it up. My time is yours at the moment. Abuse it.
So I'm seeing a great deal of similarities between this tool and Kumu. So I think that most of the questions that I had about tool set were answered on Tuesday. So this is sort of a great introduction to yet another tool. I'm looking forward to a little more discussion about how to more effectively tell the story or capture the story. So
Right.
that's the next sessions.
So this, God, how many versions of this have I done? This is this particular relationship model done in Kumu, and the video's gone, but that's all right. And then this is the same relationship model done in Insight Maker. And I did this one in Insight Maker because I specifically wanted it to look like this, which I could not do in Kumu. Right? If I'm going to develop a relationship model and then develop a simulation, it's highly likely that I will do that in Insight Maker. If I'm just going to do a qualitative relationship model and tell a story, and there isn't something specific that I need from Insight Maker, I'll do it in Kumu because the environment is a bit more fluid, and the story, I can turn a relationship model into a story in about a heartbeat, where it takes a bit longer in Insight Maker. Though if I look at this session that I did for Deanna, this is a presentation done in Kumu, which unfolds this model and talks about things as I go through. And this is an Insight Maker model unfolded inside of a Kumu presentation, which I thought was just amazing. And then if I click, I'm back in the Kumu, the other part of the Kumu presentation. And here is a Kumu presentation unfolded inside of a Kumu presentation. Back to another Kumu presentation unfolded in a Kumu presentation. Another Kumu presentation. Another Insight Maker presentation inside of the original Kumu presentation. And this is actually this web version of the brain unfolded inside of, where was I? Inside of the Kumu presentation. I actually thought it was pretty slick. I was surprised it worked, actually. So, but that probably gives you a sense of the power of the two of them. And sometimes it makes sense to put them together. Now, this was done in, somebody said, can you do this? And I said, well, I got this piece I did in Kumu, and this piece I did in Insight Maker, and this piece. And I initially went through and developed this picture, and then I attached all the pieces to it so that I could just unfold the story and it would connect with whatever it was that I needed to show at that point. So the offering that I continue to make is that if you are experiencing blank page, what do you call it? Well, what is it? If you find yourself paralyzed by the blank page, which is something that I actually experienced for years, because I learned through school that if you're going to do something, you want to do it right. So I looked at the blank page, and I always wanted to start in the right place, and I always wanted to get it right. And then somewhere along the way, I realized that Nike had the right answer. Just do it. It's all connected. It doesn't matter where you start. Just do something. It's a process of trial and learning. So if you don't start, you don't learn anything. The comment is, you can learn about riding a bicycle by reading a book or watching somebody ride a bike, but you can only learn to ride a bike by getting on the damn thing and falling off a few times. The same way with developing relationship models or simulation. You just got to do it. And if you find yourself paralyzed by the blank page syndrome, let me know, and we'll set up a session one-on-one, and I'll push you over the hump.
Moving to a stream of consciousness, just dump it and then manage it later.
Yeah, I have models that I have revised 25 or 30 times, and then some that I'll pull out 6 months later, and I'll actually ask myself, what the hell was I smoking when I did this? Because there are aspects of it that just don't make any sense. But you get drowned in a state of thought, I guess, and certain things make sense. And this is it still there? No, it's not there. Oh, this model was actually wrong for like 5 years, and nobody caught it, and nobody told me that one of the relationships was wrong. And then I looked at it one day and I said, well, that's not right. So I fixed it. The idea is that you will learn by doing it. It's sort of, this is what I think, and then your model tells you that you're mentally irregular, and you work on it some more, and you finally get to a point, especially with simulation models, that you come to a point where, okay, this is what I think I understand, and then you share it with somebody else, not because you want them to see how smart you are, because they don't care. You share it with someone else in a way that they can understand it, in the hopes that they will ask questions that you didn't think to ask, so that the model can get better. So if you ask them to look at it and offer you thoughts about it, the worst thing you can possibly do is argue with them, because then you don't get anywhere. So it's, if you look at my model and you offer me a thought that's contrary to what I thought when I built it, my question is, help me understand how you got to that perspective. Because there's an opportunity. I mean, if we both think the same thing, there's no reason for us to talk to each other. But if you have a different perspective, there's an opportunity for one or both of us to learn something.
I think that's a great point, Gina. That's why I think I'm really glad to see that you're putting together those group discussion, how to use the model to foster a group discussion, right? Because I think whether it's live, like you said, or there one person controlling the model, it's just more that it's a visual tool to help see and ask questions, and what am I missing? What's not included in this model that should be? What is included that maybe is too fine grained at this level of discussion, right? So, and thank you for showing the relationship between Kumu and Insight Maker, because I think that's where it gets really powerful and really interesting in terms of how people can engage at varying degrees of sophistication, so that maybe they're not interested in developing simulation models, but they where Kumu seems a little bit more user-friendly in terms of how you can connect these things, but the simulation really gives it power for exploring what if sort of scenarios, right? I think that's really neat to see. So thank you so much.
Yeah, Kumu is almost as fluid as a pencil and paper, and it has a better eraser. So I worked with Scott for 5-6 years on Insight Maker. And as I said, he wrote all the code and I was just a testing elf making suggestions about things to add or do differently. And then a friend of mine in Buenos Aires, Fabian Zulansky, knew that I was forever looking for environments to develop relationship models. And he sent me an email and he said, you got to look at Kumu. I went there to create a username and password and found out I already had one. I had looked at it 6 months earlier and said, bleh. And though they were still working on it, and I connected with where they were going, and I connected with the developers, and I worked with them for about 2.5 years, I think. And they gave me 90% of what I asked for. So I love the environment. And it wasn't, as long as I asked for things and explained to them how it was useful and beneficial to tell stories, they figured out how to do it, and it's just marvelous. Okay. Until next time, sirs.
Thank you very much, Gene.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Gene. Very useful. And I will be there the next time if I can.
Okay. Bye.